I'll bring this in here. Okay, everybody, welcome. This is our monthly meetup for Strange Realities. Got a little intimate crowd here, so expecting some good questions afterwards. But tonight we have our good friend Vincent Treewell, good friend of the podcast, good friend of Strange Realities, good friend, good Patreon as well, very supportive. And he's going to do something on Bigfoot and the law, which I think is going to be a really interesting topic. So I will go ahead and let you take it away, Vincent.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. Happy to be here. Um,
Thanks for it.
Always glad to be anything involved with strange realities, Conspirinormal. Couldn't be happier. Um, Welcome aboard, everyone who's listening now and in the future. The topic I have tonight is going to be a little unusual and off the beaten path, but I think that'll be okay. I'm going to be talking about Bigfoot and the law. What is the legal status of Bigfoot? I'm just going to use the terms Bigfoot and Sasquatch interchangeably. Um, I think it'll be fine. And if he's got copyright, he can sue me. Um, but yes, this whole idea or, question started when I saw something on a much less reputable website. Well, it was actually on Facebook, and it referenced one of the signs that have been put up in a number of states that say Bigfoot or Sasquatch crossing. And the person posting leaped to the conclusion that, see, the government knows they're real. That's why they're putting up signs to protect them. And I was a little less than 100% believing that. So, but it did um, get something churning in my brain. And I said, well, why not look up what is the legal status of this creature, this being, this entity, and how is that reflected in the actual written law? And how is it reflected in cases that have come up before the courts? And, what more can you find out about this angle? And found out some interesting things. At least they're interesting to me. And I think they'll probably be interesting to the people who come here. Um, I started with simply asking the question, what is the legal status of Bigfoot? And found that the federal government doesn't apparently have, and in my ear, in my mental ear, I'm hearing, yep, that's what they want you to think. But no, the federal government doesn't have that much interest in Sasquatch and hasn't devoted excessive time or effort to creating regulations around it. So Bigfoot law in the United States tends to be state by state and tends to be quite drastically different. Now, there have been some communities in some states that have passed specific Bigfoot involved laws, but generally they're, well, I digress. We'll get into the more into the weeds of Bigfoot law in America. But I don't want to turn this into what I've experienced in law school and in continuing legal education. We're talking about the most interesting of legal issues can quickly turn into a sedative. I don't want it to be that. So I have plenty of actual cases that have involved Bigfoot and have involved people getting themselves in trouble with Bigfoot and ending up in a court situation or worse. So I want to kind of mix it up, and we'll have a number of topics that all kind of, I think, kind of relate. Um, if you could give me the first, or this is the first, Bigfoot with the gavel there, but Adam, if you could give me the next, there we go, great. The next slide. This is a Bigfoot crossing. This is one that exists at Pikes Peak in Colorado and has been the subject of some back and forth between amongst members of the public. It is, to the best of my knowledge, actually put up by the state government of Colorado. And we'll see that again and again, that states that don't necessarily have any legal status for Bigfoot or have any laws compelling people to do or not do anything still like to put up tourist attractions. And this warns people that something resembling a Sasquatch may be out there and to be careful. And it's at best, I mean, I'm sorry, it's at worst a harmless way of telling people to just be safe on the trail because climbing Pikes Peak is not an inherently safe thing. And telling people to stay on the safe trails, the marked paths, is a good idea. And some people do take offense that, well, we don't know that thing's even real, but I see no harm in it whatsoever. Um, while I'm, if you would, Adam, maybe the next slide, because yes, there we get um, another state. I believe this is Oregon, and we kind of come to, it's as good a place as any, I guess, to come to the central question. Is Bigfoot protected? And that changes state by state. A official in Texas was asked about this by journalists and answered thusly. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department gave the official answer. L. David Sinclair responded, if Bigfoot did exist and wasn't human, then it would be legal to shoot Bigfoot in Texas. Bigfoot would be a non-protected wild animal. His response sort of went viral back in, let me see here, 2012. 2012 was a large year for Bigfoot law, such as it is, but it was. So yes, it'd be legal to kill Bigfoot in Texas. It's right out of the law book, Sinclair says. This came up recently when an Oregon man wrote to Sinclair asking whether or not it's legal to shoot or kill Sasquatch in Texas. Sinclair, to his credit, sent back a letter thoroughly citing various sections of the Parks and Wildlife Code to back up his answer that yes, it's legal to kill Bigfoot in Texas. A non-protected, non-game animal may be hunted on private property with landowner consent by any means at any time, and there is no bag limit or possession limit, Sinclair added. An exotic animal is an animal that is non-indigenous to Texas. Unless the exotic is an endangered species, then exotics may be hunted on private property with landowner consent. A hunting license is required. This does not include the dangerous wild animals that have been held in captivity and released for the purpose of hunting, which is commonly referred to as a canned hunt. When we asked Sinclair if he thought the letter could go viral, he responds with a chuckle, I didn't realize it was going to draw so much attention. The agency doesn't want to get into whether or not there's Bigfoot. So yes, gave kind of a green light back in 2012 for the killing of Bigfoot in Texas. I will just beg the question of, and that's why so many Bigfoot have been killed in Texas. No Bigfoot have been killed in Texas that anyone has ever been able to prove. So yes, the opposite approach is what is the law in California, Oregon, and Idaho, which is that hunting and killing Bigfoot would be illegal. Those states and others have a list of animals that can be hunted. So they have a closed approach that it has to be on this list to be hunted. And Texas has the opposite, an open approach, that if it's not on this other list, then anything can be hunted. So, in California, Oregon, and Idaho, hunting Bigfoot would be a crime. To and I'm quoting here from the message put out in 2012 as well, in response to the Texas statement, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, that the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department says that in theory it would be legal to hunt Bigfoot in their state, stated a CDFW Facebook post, not so in California. The lack of confirmation of this alleged animal's existence brings into question whether or not it occurs naturally in California, according to the agency. If Bigfoot occurs naturally in the state, then it would be defined as a non-game mammal pursuant to the California Fish and Game Code, Section 415. In order to take a non-game mammal legally in California, it must be listed in the California Code of Regulations, which Bigfoot is not. If Bigfoot does not naturally occur in California, then it would not be defined as a non-game animal and could not be taken legally unless the Bigfoot was causing property damage, in which case it could be what is called deprecated or shot to stop the property damage, or if a Bigfoot was considered a public safety threat, in which case the animal could be taken more or less in self-defense. So that is the law in California, Oregon, and Idaho. Neither of those, nor does Texas, in any way mention Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, any such term, but because any unknown animal would fall under their respective set of laws. Now, what kind of begs the question there is, we're all assuming, I mean, the agencies who've responded, that this is a animal, and not somehow human, which I will bring up in just a little moment. And if, Adam, I could get the next slide, please. Yes. These are some of the many Sasquatch crossing signs that have covered a number of states and are frequently just a tourist attraction, a, maybe tongue-in-cheek way of sometimes raising interest in local festivals and touristy events, but also sometimes provide just a general, hey, slow down, don't drive too fast in this area, and other good advice. Now, one state that definitely does have specific laws to protect Bigfoot on the books is that of Washington. Washington state has a significant history of specific laws that criminalize the killing of Bigfoot. And those go a ways back. The Sasquatch preservation laws, the 1969 Skamania, I'm going to mangle the pronunciation, but I'm not too native to rural Washington. Skamania County Resolution number 92-043 protects the creature, and I will quote directly. In one moment. Okay. So, 1969, Skamania County officials passed ordinance number 6901, the first official law of the year, dedicated to protecting and preserving Sasquatch. It was signed into law by Commissioner Conrad Lundy Jr. and prosecuting attorney Robert K. Leakey, who was the DA for that county at the time. In part, the ordinance states, and give me just a minute because I'm literally reading the statute. Whereas there is evidence to indicate the possible existence in Skamania County of a nocturnal primate mammal, various described as an ape-like creature or a subspecies of Homo sapien, and whereas public attendant upon such real or imagined sightings has resulted in an influx of scientific investigators as well as casual hunters, many armed with lethal weapons. And whereas the absence of specific laws covering the taking of specimens encourages laxity in the use of firearms and other deadly devices, imposes a clear and present threat to the safety and well-being of persons living or traveling within the boundaries of Skamania County, as well as the creatures themselves. Therefore, be it resolved that any premeditated, willful, and wanton slaying of any such creature shall be deemed a felony punishable by a fine not to exceed $10,000 and or imprisonment in the county jail for a period not to exceed 5 years. Be it further resolved that the situation existing constitutes an emergency, and as such, this ordinance is effective immediately. So it doesn't get more clear than that. Don't go to Skamania County, where there was a significant, and has been to the current time, significant numbers of Sasquatch sightings. Don't come here and kill one. You're going to pay quite a price. Later, that was reduced for the simple reason that the county board cannot make something a felony. And without getting immersed in a lot of legalese, they had to lower the penalties so that it was 1 year in the county jail. However, what I found interesting in the legal language was that a subspecies, an ape-like creature or a subspecies of Homo sapiens in the first paragraph. If one was ever to go out and achieve the goal that so many would-be reality TV stars and YouTube mighty hunters purport that they're going to do, and actually killed Bigfoot, the first issue that you would have to deal with would be what its DNA came out to be, and whether it was too close to human, and whether you just commit a homicide. So, well, I use the Skamania County law as a jumping off point because it is unusual. Washington State is unusual that it has that kind of language in any legislation. And Skamania County has been designated a Sasquatch refuge site, one of 2 counties in Washington where Bigfoot is protected, and there are significant legal penalties for even hunting for them without whether you use force or not. The key issue is that anywhere in America, if you actually harmed, even if it was not dead, but if you shot a Bigfoot, you'd have to be awfully careful. Well, you would have to be at a point it'd be too late to be careful, and you'd have to really be in great hope that its DNA didn't find that it is a subspecies of Homo sapiens. And that would provoke a dire legal question of whether you harmed a different kind of human. I think that's something that sort of gets sidestepped, that in the discussion of, Bigfoot, and if we had a body, then the often postulated, and I've postulated it myself, idea, which I don't say is untrue, but I don't think people always look through the consequences, that if you actually killed one of these things, you might be killing a human being. That it might be close enough to be one of us. I mean, if you look just across the world, people look different ways. And, if you killed a Sasquatch, you might have killed a person, and you might be a murderer. And that would be a disastrous thing for you and for it. Him, her, them, as the case may be. But yes, so I found it very interesting. That's one of the few legal documents that is open to the possibility that Sasquatch may be a subspecies of humanity. And if I'm going to digress just a bit from the strictly legal and into a bit more of speculation, because I don't think that anybody's going to mind too much a little speculation around here. But I have thought for a while, and thank you, Amy. Yes, Bigfoot are people too. I concur. I think of somebody like, and I often use him as my example just because if you see him standing next to anybody else, you're not going to be confused on who's who. If you had a person the size of Shaquille O'Neal, now he's not unimaginably tall. He's about 7 feet tall, and he's, probably weighs over 400 pounds, but not impossibly huge. I mean, the man's a public figure. He played basketball for many years, and he's a beloved. He advertises everything. He's a spokesperson in our culture today. If you had somebody who was his size and had that genetic condition that causes hair to grow all over your face and body, there was, and I think still is, a family in Mexico that has that condition. And for a number of years I don't know if it's an exploitative situation or not, but did a lot of circus work. I don't know what they're doing these days, but it is always stuck. And there's certain many examples. I won't say common, but it's common enough to be recognized genetic tweak that if you're born with this particular DNA sequence, you'll have hair all over your face and body. Well, if you had those two fairly not common, but not non-existent genetic quirks, you're the size of Shaq, and you had that hair condition, how different would you look from a Sasquatch? Really not at all. I mean, really, it'd be just a matter of lifestyle. Like you choose to wear clothes and live in a house and drive a car, and it wouldn't really be any different than the things that many, many people perceive and report and see. And I think that thought should be on the mind of anybody who might be thinking of getting that body that'll prove this, because I think you might just be committing murder, and that's a pretty important thing. So I'll step away from that tangent for a little while. Let me see. But yes, so Washington is, for a long time, the only state that had specific laws protecting Sasquatch. But that is no longer the case. And give me just a moment. I wanted to get to the other county in Washington that, well, first I just have to take a mention of something that was said in the Skamania County case, that the amended ordinance states, should the Skamania County coroner determine any victim/creature to have been humanoid, the prosecuting attorney shall pursue the case under existing laws pertaining to homicide. So there you have it. It's a very big deal. And, you can't unpull the trigger on something like that. I would be extremely hesitant unless a situation of absolute self-defense, which, I have to, again, just a little bit digress and give a whole lot of recognition to Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner for their excellent, books that are really pillars on the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomena, Where the Footprints End, 1 and 2, because going over just countless I mean, they went through thousands of different cases of people having violent encounters with Sasquatch, with Bigfoot. And overwhelmingly, most of the violence is done by the humans. And yet, there was not one where it was successful. That's, I'm stating the obvious that we don't have a dead Bigfoot or we don't have a wounded one in a zoo. But that phenomenon, however threatening the creature came off, it was the people doing the shooting. And I would strongly discourage doing that kind of shooting. It's not going to defend you. And it's, worst case, well, we'll have some worst cases coming up, but you could actually be hurting a human being. So yes, so for several years, Skamania County remained the only Bigfoot preserve in Washington State. In 1991, amidst the creation of the Mount Baker Foothills Bigfoot Festival, a new Sasquatch preservation law was passed in Whatcom County, a county bordering British Columbia and encompassing Mount Baker, among other mountains, in North Cascades National Park. Resolution number 92043 declared Whatcom County a Sasquatch Protection and Refuge Area. It states, whereas legend, purported recent finding, and spoor suggested that Bigfoot may exist, and whereas, if such creature exists, it is inadequately protected, in danger of death or injury. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Whatcom County Council that Whatcom County is hereby declared a Sasquatch Protection and Refuge Area, and all citizens are asked to recognize said status. So yes, there are now two counties in covering, when I say county, that doesn't sound that large, but geographically they cover a lot of area where Bigfoot is officially protected. And I think that's a good thing. Let's see. More recently, like this year, the state of Tennessee joined Washington in having specific protections in place for Bigfoot. This is a very controversial bill. HB 2063, which came from Senate Bill 2691 and House Bill 2063. Okay, like anybody's writing this down, but I did want to give the legal, terminology for what was passed in the state of Tennessee. This was mostly known for passing a law to protect the people of Tennessee from contrails, a controversial belief that the government or some other powerful entities are spraying chemicals down on the state from planes. Now is probably not the time to take up that entirely separate and, to say the minimum, interesting issue. But part of this law passed, I'm looking for the exact date, but it was this year. Also covers Bigfoot. Whereas is the intent of the General Assembly to protect the public health and welfare of Tennesseans and all other creatures while allowing all authorized activities permitted under state law. Now, therefore, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, Section 1, Tennessee Code annotated Title 68, Chapter 201, Part 1 is amended by adding the following as a new section. The intentional injection, release, or dispersion by any means of chemicals, chemical compounds, substances, or apparatus within the borders of the state into any atmosphere with the express purpose of affecting temperature, weather, or intensity of the sunlight, which may also threaten the Sasquatch and its natural habitat, is protected. So yes, kind of a roundabout way of protecting Sasquatch from any contrails that were coming down, which I don't know, maybe would affect them more than they would affect us. But that is real law. That is not, this is not fan fiction or something on the internet. This is a law passed by the state of Tennessee. So, um, Adam, if you could give me the next slide, please. This is what I wanted to demonstrate as far as a lot of local municipalities, sometimes states, but often counties and cities and towns, villages, putting up Bigfoot signage that is not entirely sincere, but is lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek. These two workers from the Parks Department in Round Rock, Texas, are putting up Bigfoot crossing signs. When questioned, the head of the Parks Department said that we weren't so much, and I'm paraphrasing him, I'm not going to dig it up and quote it directly, but basically, we're not so much worried about people running into Bigfoot. We're more to encourage people getting out and walking and maybe getting kids playing outdoors more. Though I really questioned whether putting up signs warning that there might be a huge hairy creature was the best way to draw children out. They did what they did, and it seems at minimum amusing. And yeah, I probably would have done that as a kid too and gone out looking for it. It is just, it is a very, now this is not a fake photo. This is a very real sign of two parks workers putting up the Bigfoot crossing. And I think that's a good thing too, if I may. Let's see. Adam, I think ready for the next slide. Yes, now this is, we kind of take a turn here and just, into a bit of a more negative side to this, but still proving kind of honestly the same point. This was a real incident that happened in August of 2012. A man wearing a suit similar to what's depicted here, Randy Lee Kenley of Calypso, Montana, apparently attempted to do a Bigfoot hoax and wear this, what is described as a ghillie suit. I guess there's different kinds of ghillie suits. It doesn't exactly look like the ones that I'm acquainted with from the military, but it doesn't totally not look like that either. And definitely could be taken for being Sasquatch. And he went out, Mr. Tenley, who was 44 at the time, and attempted to hang around in the roadway and cause people to think they had seen Bigfoot. Unfortunately, so I'm quoting here very briefly from a LA Times report that quotes Montana Highway Patrol Lieutenant Colonel Butch Housby. What we know so far is we had a couple of guys out allegedly trying to prompt a sighting of Bigfoot. As Henny bluntly says, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, really. It was no doubt a frightening sight for the teenage girl who was driving down a two-lane highway about 10:30 p.m. Sunday near Flathead Lake in northwestern Montana. That's when Tenley, dressed in a camo, stepped out into the roadway, officials said. The girl's car struck Tenley, who was then struck by a second car, also driven by a teenage girl. The victim was pronounced dead on the scene. It goes on to just describe, some of the circumstances, and that Mr. Tenley died on the spot, and that the drivers were not charged with anything because there's no standard way to respond to seeing a huge Bigfoot suddenly walking across the road in front of you. I would just, as somebody who, like most of us or all of us, is at least somewhat into this, that makes the scorecard one person dressed as a Bigfoot dead crossing the road, and a seemingly countless number of actual Bigfoot who cross the road and never get hit. Not one actual Bigfoot found dead by being hit by a car, though they seem to be always crossing the road. And if they were always crossing the road, it seemed that that would happen like it did to Mr. Tenley a hell of a lot more a hell of a lot more often if they were just a regular flesh and blood creature. I'll just leave the speculation there, but it does seem to be an obvious comparison that there is one human who didn't make it doing this, and yet it's an extremely common part of the phenomena to see it walking across and yet never gets hit. So I'll leave that one at that. And Adam, if I may get the next slide. And here, yeah, we get a little dark here. This is a mugshot of Russell Welch, 44, in Fresno, California. This goes back to October of 1987. And to, kind of jump to the chase, Mr. Welch is the only person that I've been able to locate in all of this that actually used a Bigfoot defense to get away with a crime. What that crime was is, at this point, can't be said to be known, because he never went beyond being arrested. He was never formally charged. He was freed from jail 3 days before the scheduled start of his trial on charges of child stealing. Fresno County authorities, and I'm quoting this from the UPI, archives back to October 3rd, 1987. Fresno County authorities said they were forced into letting Russell Welch, 44, back on the streets to avoid double jeopardy if they later chose to charge the man with murder. Welch is accused of abducting Theresa Ann Byer, 16, last June. The two went camping in the Central Sierra, and the girl did not return. Let me just cut to here. Welch apparently sincerely believes in Bigfoot creatures and claims to have continued contact with a tribe of them. District Attorney Evoice Hooper Friday offered Welch a 1-year term on child stealing charges if he would sign a waiver allowing for a murder trial in the event that the girl's body is found. But Welch's public defender, Mel Ruby, refused to sign a waiver, and Hooper said he was forced to drop the charge in case authorities later want to charge Welch with murder. If the body is not found, Hooper said, he will probably refile the child stealing charges with a maximum penalty of 4 years in prison, which I don't have the California legal background to know how the hell kidnapping was owned, or child stealing, as it was referred to, a lesser form of kidnapping perhaps, only carried a max of 4 years at that time, but the 80s were a different time. Welch had been scheduled to stand trial Monday. Ruby denies his client has anything to do with the girl's disappearance, would not say if Welch is still contending that Bigfoot took the girl. Following up on this, through the years, her body was never located, and no charges were ever brought against Welch. So I don't know what happened, and maybe he was not guilty. And do I believe that Bigfoot abducted that girl? Absolutely not. Do I believe that she could have died from causes not related to Welch? Possibly. Yeah, I hope so, and I hope somebody didn't get away with murder with a ridiculous Bigfoot story. But that actually did happen once. I have kind of a saying that if anything is physically possible, it's happened once. Somewhere, at some time, it's happened once. Well, this is the once. Somebody actually got away with, apparently, committing a very serious crime by blaming Bigfoot. So yes. And I do, for what it's worth, hold that Bigfoot is not guilty. In any event, Adam, if you could give me the next slide. Now, this fellow is kind of the opposite story. His name is Larry Doyle Sanders. This happened just this year. He was found guilty at the end of April for killing his friend. He said they killed his friend because he believed the victim was summoning Bigfoot and going to sacrifice him to Bigfoot. Larry Doyle Sanders was found guilty by an Oklahoma judge April 17th, and it goes on to quote from the Oklahoman, the Ada News, and KXII. Jimmy Knighton was strangled to death in July 2022 while out fishing with Sanders. After waiving a right to a jury trial, Sanders' attorney reportedly claimed that his client had acted in self-defense. The Ohioan reported that Sanders claimed during testimony he had begun fighting with Knighton. He had seen 3 Sasquatches appear and believed that Knighton had summoned them. Sanders faces up to life in prison without parole, and they go in to describe that, the victim certainly did not deserve this. While drugs were involved, it cannot be not noticed that a deep belief in Bigfoot, and Bigfoot as some sort of mystical being that you could summon, were also a key part of this crime. And, somebody really took this to the extent that killed a friend of his in this belief system. So, just a cautionary tale of not going off the deep end with any of the things that we get into, or anything else, but particularly with things like that. Or if you've gotten to the point that you think your friend might be summoning Bigfoot to sacrifice you, it's gone way, way too far. But yes, this is a real thing that really happened. Which allows, I just need to segue a little bit into something that I had heard for years was a real thing that really happened, and was not. In doing the research for this episode, I came across frequently something that I had heard. I had heard it mostly conversationally on podcasts and just talking with friends and stuff, that at some point, and yes, as Amy points out, meth is a hell of a drug. And yes, meth was a factor. There's no pulling any punches, definitely. That was a part of how you get to a point where you're believing that you might be sacrificed to Bigfoot by your friend who can summon them. But I had heard for many years the story of a guy dressed up in a gorilla suit who was going to fake a Bigfoot sighting, and 2 deer hunters saw him and shot him to death. And I had heard that, and because it involved realistic sounding names, in fact, I had read it. I had read it on a number of websites that was a real thing that happened. And it happened in Clarion, Pennsylvania. And the hunters are listed as Fred and Gerald Dormer, and the victim was listed as Patrick Sergan of Clarion, who died after a single shot in the chest from a 30-30 rifle. After doing more research than I really should have done and not having the greatest time management, I was able to learn that no, that never happened. Those people didn't exist. There are people by those names, but 2 deer hunters didn't shoot a guy dressed in a gorilla suit in Clarion, Pennsylvania in 2000. That comes from one article in the Weekly World News from the year 2000, which was then recklessly or blindly repeated as a source, usually unattributed source, into a number of websites and postings. And because it sounds like a story that would happen. It sounds like that'd be totally real. And I can't guarantee that nothing ever like that ever happened. But I can say the only one that I saw repeatedly had those same names, same location, and no, it just came from the Weekly World News. So I can just kind of debunk that one right there that, you know, debunks the wrong term. But I can lay that one to rest that Clarion, Pennsylvania, there was not a man dressed as a gorilla faking Bigfoot shot by deer hunters. Didn't happen. This was floating around unattributed in the somewhat earlier days of the internet. So I'm sure it's got a lot better now. No, but yes, that one was not true. That was fiction. Um, Earlier, I had mentioned that the feds do not have a great. If you could give me the next slide there, Adam, thanks. And this is what I really wanted to show. Yes, that this is not what happened. Okay, there were no deer hunters shooting this guy to death. In Clarion, Pennsylvania, completely one episode of the Weekly World News. And you'd be surprised how many people cut and paste that without attribution, did not attribute it to the supermarket tabloid it came from, and just repeated this story. Because the answer's a lot. It's a bunch, you know. And tracking it down and finding it wasn't true was, frankly, pretty interesting. Really, that whole thing, that thing I've been hearing, didn't happen. Sometimes that's the case. Despite what I said earlier about the federal government not having that great an interest in Bigfoot, the FBI did get involved at a certain point and produced a rather thick case file that I'm holding here. Starting back in December 17th of 1976. It's not riveting reading. There's no big takeaways, whistleblowing, bombshells, none of that. It's available, and I was actually kind of happy with this. It's available at thevault.gov, where you can find things that the FBI and CIA and other agencies have released, which means, of course, that there's probably very little of interest in them. But this was, in its own way, kind of fascinating to me. Thinking, how many pages is this? It's a lot. I don't encourage anyone to spend inordinate time digging into it, but I can encapsulate the FBI case file on Bigfoot, which I will spare everyone from reading too much directly from it. But it essentially involves hair evidence that was submitted in the 70s and the more modern day attempts by a Bigfoot investigation organization, which I'm looking for the exact title of. I don't believe it was BFRO. And that's why I'm just, here it is. The Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition. And many back and forth documents that were sent to the FBI asking for some hair evidence to be examined in the Quantico lab. And after significant delay, it was revealed that they did analyze the hairs, and the hairs belonged to deer. And so that's, kind of, I guess, par for the course when it comes to the difficulties of pinning down Sasquatch physical evidence. And this is something that, of course, Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner have commented on too. The vanishing nature, the self-negating nature of physical evidence in this subject. And, what they sent in was not obviously deer hair, but it ends up being deer hair. And this is one where I don't feel that there is some sort of cover up. I just don't see any compelling motive for the FBI to lie about this hair being deer hair. So yes, with the case file on Bigfoot and just the fact that they had one, is pretty fascinating to me. Um, so yes, um, Adam, I'm ready for maybe the last slide, but the next slide anyway. Yes. And this is kind of where is the state of the law with Bigfoot today. Um, well, the first thing I would say is, for God's sake, don't use violence against Bigfoot. Okay, they're probably only going to hurt some other regularly understood Homo sapien and get yourself in a bunch of trouble. On the off chance that you have done the one impossible thing that nobody ever can do, and you take it down, you could still be in a hell of a lot of trouble. When it comes to the law of Bigfoot, basically do no harm. Take your pictures, they won't turn out, nobody will believe you. But take the tracks, take what you want, but don't use violence against Bigfoot. No good will come of that. I have a number of examples of these are not violent incidents. These are more lawsuits. And I was planning on introducing more of them, but they began to be, they were boring to me, and I'm kind of, into the law. So I thought, you may not want to inflict this on your audience. They're mostly lawsuits that have been filed between different Bigfoot investigation groups and people who are at least who are okay. Let me just subdivide there between more serious investigation groups that are interested in finding scientific fact and reality TV investigators who may have a bit of a different interest. Okay. And those groups tend to rub elbows rather hard and tend to not get along very well and tend to sue each other a lot. And often, and rarely any bombshell, results, often solving, reaching agreement out of court, but often with a high level of viciousness for the nature of the subject, which you'd think would bring people together maybe a little bit more than what it does. But there is money involved. So, and I'll just say this, that the guy from Finding Bigfoot, and I don't have a problem in naming him because I'm not accusing him of anything bad. He is not averse to using his legal rights. I'll just put it like that. And that's Matt Moneymaker. And as best as I can determine, that is his legal given name. Leave that hang there. But he's known to go to court from time to time. And there's a lot of infighting in these kind of groups. Let's see. Oh, Amy asks me, who sues more, the TV folks or the more ground level Bigfoot people? It's tough to give a clear answer because sometimes the friction it gets pretty deep. Copyright, who has, the rights to this footage? It's not clear cut. There's not a real bad guy or good guy. because there are people who also decide that, yeah, I'm a serious researcher, but I've never made a dime off of this. And, maybe I can recoup some of that too. And I hate to guess at people's motivation. It's tough to say. It's not as clear cut as one might think. Um, at this point, I think I've kind of wrapped up the bulk of my prepared presentation, but I'd be more than happy to continue to ramble on for an almost unlimited period of time. And I, if anyone has questions, please feel free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vincent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Adam, Serfiel?
Does anyone have questions for Vincent?
I don't know if so much as a question as a comment. I always find it interesting how there used to seem to be so much in the older Bigfoot literature, including things by like Lauren Coleman and Jerome Clark. I think it's Creatures of the Outer Edge or that book, but it's in a lot of the older Bigfoot literature about people shooting at Bigfoot, but with never any, and since Dan Gordon's work as well, without any actual result. You know what I mean? They either just swat at the bullets like flies or you disappear in a flash of blue light. Or so it's interesting. I mean, that's just a comment. It's interesting to think that there's this type of legislation on the table in some counties and states, while the evidence would seem to suggest that Bigfoot's impervious to any attack anyway.
Well, and that you make a good point. And like in the Washington state laws, they were not, in my humble opinion, reading between the lines, they were not made to protect Bigfoot itself, himself, herself, themselves. They were not made to protect Sasquatch. They were made to protect the public from reckless people shooting at things they see, and that's not good. You don't want that. There was a case that I somehow, I don't know, completely didn't make a slide for, and I don't know why I didn't, because I have the article sitting right here. But the danger really is people, very much regular human beings, going off and shooting at what they think is Bigfoot and killing him as a person. This happened, they didn't kill anybody, fortunately, but they did shoot at someone. This happened in 2019. I don't know why I didn't make a slide for this one. In the Mammoth, nearby Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, a man who was not identified in this article fired several rounds after telling overnight visitors that a half-man, half-ape had lunged at him. Park rangers have since said they found no evidence Bigfoot was there, but are investigating the fact a firearm was fired. Madeline Durand and Brad Ginn, who reported the incident, said the shooter had woken them at 11 p.m. on Sunday by shining a flashlight in their tent. I got out and saw a man and his son who told us their campsite had been destroyed by something or someone or something, said Ms. Durand, 22. We heard them come back about 10 minutes later, heard them yelling, I see it. We saw the flash from his gun, and he shot maybe 20 yards from the side of our tent into pitch black darkness. So some disturbing behavior. Asked if she was scared, the Western Kentucky University student told CNN, I was mostly just concerned about him shooting the gun in the middle of the night without him really seeing anything. It is unclear what has happened with the shooter, but park spokesman Molly Schroeder said rangers knew who he was and that no threat currently existed to the park or to the public. But yes, the incident came just 8 months after, and is a very similar story. A Montana man reportedly shot at a stranger in a forest, who then told him he had mistaken him for Bigfoot. So yes, I think the intent of the law in Washington state was more to protect humans than to protect Bigfoot. The Bigfoot don't really need protecting. They seem to be okay. We don't have any dead ones, and we don't, they seem to be fine. It's that we're going to shoot each other that people are worried about, which I think is a quite legitimate concern. So,
I
yes.
like your car crossing point as well, that we always see them crossing the road supposedly, but none's ever been hit. And somebody in a ghillie suit actually does get hit. So what are the odds?
Exactly. That I find that fascinating, that it shouldn't be like deer get hit all the time. Good luck not hitting a deer in some states, but we never have that Bigfoot that didn't quite make it. But we do have a human who didn't make it, So what does it tell you? I just say that it tells you it's probably not. I'm not saying not a flesh and blood creature. I believe they're flesh and blood at the moment, but I believe they're more than that, would be the way I'd describe it.
Well, let me say this. The you know, I fall in that category too. But just to play devil's advocate for a second, if anybody says that, I mean, the biggest thing about Bigfoot, the big conundrum, is that you would almost to prove for those that believe Bigfoot is physically real, or at least permanently physically real, to prove that Bigfoot is real, you would need to have a body. You would need to have something that would definitively prove it. But if we're talking about the fact that the idea that Bigfoot might be a human being, then you are running into some immoral quandary there. So like what would prove it would be that, or a live specimen, a live Bigfoot. But more than likely it's going to be probably like it's going to be dead, and that's how you're going to prove it. So how do you work around that in order to prove it to the wider world? And then just like how tongue in cheek is some of the things that you talked about, these laws and these things like.
I would concur that yes, only a body would prove living or dead. I mean, fortunately, hopefully it could be living, but those haven't shown up either. Um, the numbers really stop me from believing that it's a normal animal, just like a grizzly bear, like a gorilla. Um, if you could have a really rare relic hominid or undiscovered primate, but nobody ever see it. We briefly discussed the orang pendek, the man of the forest that is said to live in the rainforest in the island of Java. But even the indigenous people never see it, like almost never. I think it was Josh Gates' Adventure X or something that they went looking for the orang pendek, and they hired a indigenous guide, but he said never seen it. He could take them to a village where one guy years ago said he saw it. They'd be that rare to be unseen and not to have a body. You could have something like that in the Pacific Northwest, but nobody'd see it. You can't have something that big and it's a normal animal. And everybody sees it like every weekend, but there's no body, dead or alive. You can't really have that. The numbers just don't make it possible. And even if it was, like I was kind of speculating that it might be a different kind of human being, like a strain of human, they still wouldn't be able to get away with crossing the road all the time and being seen in all these different and getting shot. They wouldn't survive getting shot at many times. That's what makes me into a woo Bigfoot person, because I just don't think they're here and physical all the time. And that's I think you've pointed out the conundrum right there.
That is without a massive cover up, right?
Yes, it's
That
on the
is
off chance
yeah.
that the men in black are not showing up and taking away every dead one for some reason that, yeah. Um, It'd make absolutely no sense. Yes.
Well, and I know we've encountered like these weird, like the Bubba version, the special forces redneck version of Men in Black. You know, there's stories kind of about this, these weird like government looking trapper dudes like out in the middle of nowhere who people have encountered around these Bigfoot sightings though. So that's really the only way you can go with having to have a physical specimen like you're saying.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, I find the modern day folklore of somebody who comes in and takes the dead Bigfoot that this guy shot. I find it amusing. I find it fascinating, but I just don't have any credibility there at all. I'll believe Groshk and UFO disclosure, like and put a mortgage on my house for it before I believe that. It just doesn't ring true to me in the least. Most of all, because I don't see the motive. I just don't.
Well, do you think that it could be similar to like the theories around extraterrestrial existence being suppressed in that it calls into question some kind of evolutionary thing or might upset fundamentalists? We already have all this Bigfoot Nephilim stuff. So maybe it could just be a general public order kind of thing.
I get the theory, but they already teach evolution I'm speaking here in 2024, so I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but they teach evolution in high school.
I don't know how much longer they're going to be teaching high school in many more places, dude.
Yes, I just don't. The people who don't believe in evolution aren't going to suddenly start believing in it because we found an upright walking ape. We found plenty of stuff that, makes you believe in evolution. I just don't see it being that big a threat to people's beliefs. And I don't see the people who have those beliefs having the influence that the government's going to cover up for them so they're not disturbed. I get what you're saying, and it's interesting.
I'm not a subscriber to those beliefs, but I was just playing devil's advocate.
No, that's great. You hear a lot about that. The internet is rife with people who've killed Bigfoot, but of course, they never have one. They always, warned away and told not to talk about it, so they talk about it nonstop, and nothing ever happens. But yeah,
I guess the move now would be to make like a TV show around it because there's no real traveling. Well, I guess there might be a few little traveling freak shows at some circuses, maybe state fairs or something.
That is fascinating because I actually had that experience when I was in my teens at the Fond du Lac County Fair in Wisconsin. I saw, and when I say saw, it was very much a display. I had to pay to see it. What was, I believe, the Minnesota Iceman. And he was laid out in dried ice in this coffin, and it didn't convince, even as a teenager.
Adam, didn't we just watch Unsolved Mysteries of that?
Yes, when I was there with you in Seattle, it came on one of those channels. Yeah, Minnesota Iceman. I mean,
well, you saw it, dude.
I did. Yes.
Disappeared.
He was a big, like I assume it was made out of wax or something, but he was like a very large man, but his facial features, he just looked like a human. They didn't really seem to put that much effort into making him ape-like. Maybe they wanted us to think he was a Viking or something because he had a big beard, and he was just laying there, and he was said to be the Michigan Iceman. And I'm sorry, not Michigan,
okay.
Minnesota Iceman.
So when did you see this, Vincent? Because what you saw, well, actually, when did you see it? Because
about 85.
Yeah, so I think
84 to 86.
The original Minnesota Iceman disappears. The one that was actually investigated, quote unquote investigated, was actually looked at. I'm looking at Jerome Clark's book about this right now. That they actually So it disappeared, and I think what was in so Sanderson was the guy that I think was the person that was investigating it or had it. Hansen was the guy. So Sanderson was the other guy investigating it. So it says this is in Jerome Clark's book. So it says Sanderson died in 1973, still convinced that the Iceman he and Hubelmans had seen, unlike the one in subsequent circulation, was a real animal. So they replaced it with like this like convincing looking fake. It probably was made out of wax. So that circulated for a long time. But before that was the one that people were just like, this might be real.
Fascinating.
And that was like earlier. That was like in the 60s that they saw that.
And
So
they
like
kept it
something
in
happened,
ice, or
it disappears for a little while, and then they're touring this whole other like block of ice that supposedly is the Iceman. So that's interesting though, that like you saw that and that was still in circulation
oh
at
yeah,
that time, even if it wasn't like the quote unquote real Minnesota Iceman, just the replacement, but they were still like showing that thing off.
oh yes, and this was, I mean, this is
That's,
real low level carny stuff. This
oh
was,
yeah,
you know, not
absolutely.
put on like by the local university. This is just strictly, freak show stuff. And it just looked like they didn't make it look very ape-like. It looked much more human, but just hairier and very tall and broad. But yeah, it's fascinating when I was a kid. I even then didn't believe it.
Well, supposedly the original Iceman, um, so like I think the story went because we just saw this. I think the story went was that um this guy Hansen, he was showing this thing around all across the Midwest, and they were somewhere in some town or whatever, and like this anthropology student saw it, and he went and he was like intrigued by it, and he thought, well, this might be real because it had like a bullet hole in it
Oh wow.
apparently in the head and shit. And so he gets like his professor to come look at it. And like, of course the guy, the owner of it, Hanson, he's very like cagey, like you can look at it, but not for long. You can't really take a picture of it. You can draw a picture of it, So there's these like, here, I'll share my screen again. Uh, yeah. So you guys can see it. Can you see it?
Okay.
So yeah, to the right here, you can see like the picture, and I think this was the one that was, yeah, Sanderson and Hoovelman. So they were like the anthropology guys that actually went and looked at it, and they did these sketches of it. He's got his arm like this, you know, and they were pretty convinced by it that it was
It
like a
looks
real thing.
remarkably, yeah, like something, I don't know. It made the first thing I thought of was those people they found in Ireland in the bogs
Uh-huh.
that,
Right.
it has a look of realism. Now, that's
Yeah.
just looking at a picture of a picture, I don't know, but wow,
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
But then what happens is they look at it, they do this sketch, there's this kind of a buzz about it, and then the Hanson guy, the Carney, he just pulls it, just
Hmm.
stops showing it.
Hmm.
And what they said was the original, like, actually disappears at a point, and then there's also like, now this one is completely fake. There's like, what is that? Another one that's in Fort Dodge, Iowa.
Hmm.
It's like I think it's the Cardiff Giant, I
Oh,
think.
okay. The Cardiff
Yeah.
Giant is just made out of
Yeah.
rock, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's made of rock, but it's like another one of these weird, um, sideshow attractions.
Oh yes.
Just kind of really like it was like a PT Barnum thing.
Well,
And it ends
wasn't
up, I
wasn't
believe
the
it
Cardiff
ends up
Giant
in,
dug up in upstate New York?
yeah,
And it was
Cardiff, New
Cardiff,
York.
yes. And it was kind
Yeah,
of supposed to be like pro-biblical, like it was supposed to be one of the giants from the Bible or something.
yeah, right. And it ended up being from Fort Dodge, Iowa.
Huh.
So it hired men to carry out, see, 1868 hole, accompanied by a man named H.B. Martin, hired men to carry out a 10-foot, 4.5-inch long block of gypsum in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And said they're going to use it for a statue of Abraham Lincoln in New York, and they ended up making this thing, right? And um, P.T. Barnum like displays it, you know, and it ends up back in Fort Dodge, Iowa, because it was obvious damn hoax,
Oh yeah, there's no
and
skeleton.
like,
It's just a statue,
but
like it's carved.
what's weird about it is that Fort Dodge, Iowa, your Dr. Future doing all his research on the Georgia Guidestones and Howard Kirsten. Howard Kirsten lived in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Well, like that's where those two guys that built Georgia Guidestones were from, was Fort Dodge, Iowa. And he always told me, it's like, well, you can go and there's the Cardiff Giant on display. And it's like, what? Just, so you got these kind of two weird, kind of just
Well,
like weird
nexus of
Americana
something there,
sideshow
yeah.
attractions that are connected to this one town. It's interesting.
We need to
Um,
start a Cardiff Giant truther podcast.
yeah, yeah.
So they don't want you to know.
Minnesota Iceman. I don't know. It was like that. That I mean, that convinced a couple of people that there might be something to it.
Mhm.
Now, where the
It
hell
would
it
be
was
so
from,
ironic if the
here's the card. Here's the Cardiff Giant. You
oh
guys can see
wow.
what that looks
Okay,
like.
now that's definitely not what I saw at the state fair. I mean, at the
Yeah,
county fair.
Did they say he's petrified?
I think that was the original story.
Okay.
Yeah, they had dry
Was that
ice on him, and he
you
was
talking about the
just
Cardiff Giant or the
Yeah, the Cardiff Giant.
yeah.
oh yeah,
So P.T. Barnum actually caught. It said he was a 10-foot tall, roughly 3,000-pound purported petrified man, uncovered on October 16th, 1869, by workers digging a well behind the barn of William C. Stubb Newell in Cardiff, New York. And then Barnum made a copy of it, and that's what Barnum was displaying.
he had
Legit.
a
Yeah, so
certain
yeah, it's legit.
specific talent. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, like, the thing is that um, you know, yeah, it's total bullshit. It's a complete fake. But it's like the other part of the story is, like, well, why? What was the motivation? I mean, besides money, obviously, but motivation, as to why. So
I would say that honestly, that was kind of the time when there really was a push between evolution and creation, and being able to pull out, well, this is one of the giants they talk about in the Bible. I think that had some appeal. And I'm gonna just throw this out there that I don't discount that the Smithsonian may have misplaced some giant bones. Um, and I know that's got a lot of, I can't prove that, but it doesn't sound totally stupid to me, because there was a bias on the side of those who believed a literal version of the Bible that you have to have giants. But there was also a bias on those who believed in evolution and the scientific method, that we don't want to find any giants. Okay, if we find giants, it makes it sound like the biblical record's true, and we don't really want to make that sound like that. I think there's some bias to be found there, and I wouldn't dismiss completely that some bones of some very large people were found and just kind of deprioritized. That does make sense to me.
Yeah, and that's during a very early period of archaeology,
Yes.
so they were trying to establish this science itself. So, there's a lot at stake.
Absolutely. And none of that would, to me, people being, if you had a tribe where everybody was over 7 feet tall, that wouldn't be that weird. It wouldn't defy
Yeah, I
some
mean, they
law of
almost
biology or whatever.
exist now and have existed in the past. So,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we're not talking 15 feet.
15 feet.
Yeah.
And see, that's a slide I wanted to have. I left that out by accident. There's a, and it's all over the internet. Anybody can see it easily. But there's a real, and this is a real picture as far as I know. There's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson standing next to Shaq, standing next to Yao Ming, the basketball player from China. And each is very tall, but each fits like right under the other's shoulder. And it just shows you how perception of height, there's only like 13 inches total in difference in height, but height's perceived in a way that it looks more than what it is. I don't believe for a second, whatever else is going on with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, there's no 15-foot creatures. That just doesn't work like that. There's no 12-foot creatures. But if you actually saw an 8-foot tall man, you'd think, my God, he's gigantic, even though he's really only like 2 feet taller than you. But,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of perception.
Yeah, and the fact of just like over exaggeration over time through
Yes.
storytelling and through myth. Yeah, I mean, I could see that it would just be eventually just an exaggeration.
And even in like cases of like crimes, people often, because of their emotional state,
Yeah,
see
right,
the attacker as taller than
right.
they were by like a foot, It's human nature.
Well, you brought up a good point there. Not really, it's not really a legal thing, I guess, but just like, that equation that people make between Bigfoot and Nephilim is like a big, big thing now.
Oh yeah, that's surging. I didn't focus on it because it didn't really relate to what specifically I was talking about, but there's a whole community with that. And they're
Yeah,
right
there
there with
absolutely
Dogman
is.
too. That's yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, but it goes on. It goes a little bit into the one guy you were talking about that thought his friend was going to conjure Bigfoot to come take his soul or whatever. So there is this recognition. That recognition of Bigfoot is like this possible like uh spiritual creature. Like that is something there, and it's like starting to seep into like some weird religious belief too. And also, yes, meth is a hell of a drug. But I think like Amy said, but I think that that's very possible that people are beginning, there's almost a religious quality to some of this because I look at the Bigfoot stuff and like the Bigfoot imagery is all over the place, and it's very much become like this whole um it's very much become like a big part of like kind of like rural American culture, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it tends to be. And
In the
it's
last few years, it's really gotten that way.
yes,
So it
and
almost has
for
like this
yeah.
like it almost is like a religious thing for some people. Some people get
Oh,
really big into it.
100%. And it's always a demon. Always demon. It's never an angel. It's
Well, it's all,
always
yeah. I mean, that's
yeah,
true for most things.
it's always the descendant of a Nephilim, the fallen angels, the offspring with human women. It's, always something evil. And, you know, I kind of miss the era when we're just looking for we're looking for the monkey in the woods, because
Yeah.
it's a lot more innocent than looking for the offspring of Satan.
There,
Got a moment of audio difficulties going on.
Yeah. Just use your computer speakers. But yeah, that was real fun, especially to be a resident long time of Tennessee and now Washington. There's so much local stuff, and I think they probably, represent really different things in the legal regimes that have been created in these states. I think Washington was probably the older kind of ecological symbol,
Oh
Captain.
yes, yeah, you're dead on there, sir. I didn't realize you've lived in both those places. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
and now and Tennessee, Bigfoot's probably a lot more aligned with the libertarian right. So
He
it's
has
kind of fun.
strangely become, yes, this symbol of, don't tread on me type of thing. It's really that okay. It's kind of it is a thing. No, it's all over the internet. Absolutely.
All right.
Adam,
Well,
there you go. There you are.
yeah, I'm here. If anybody else don't have any questions, I want to thank Vincent for giving his excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Vincent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really
This
appreciate it. Love to be
this
here.
of course will go on to the Patreon so people can catch it. So thank you very much, Vincent.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys. See you in
All right,
Nashville.
Yes, sir.
absolutely.
That's not
Absolutely. All
long
right.
from now.
No,
Not
it's
at all.
not. I'm going to stop the recording here, but if anybody wants to just hang out and chat for a little bit, that is fine as well. So I want to thank everybody for that showed up for coming, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you and have a good night.
All right, I saw.
It still says recording on my